Good morning. We're learning Ayin Beis, pages 1147 through 1149, but we're learning it through the eyes of Tafresh Sadik Dalad, which is 5694. We're on page 56, I believe. 56. Right. So to sum up, we're learning about the process of the creative process between the Yesh and the Yesh. Yesh Amiti refers to the ultimate source, the absolute true reality of Atzmus. The Yesh Anivra is the other end of the spectrum, is the created reality, which is our existence. And then there's the channel in between called the Ayin Beis, that channel that is the actual carrier of the divine energy, creative energy. And that breaks into two parts, the Ayin that relates to the Yesh Amiti, the Ayin that relates to the Yesh Anivra. In explaining those stages of the Ayin, of the Oyer, as it goes through its process of relating more and more to existence, while its highest levels express what the source, Atzmus, the Yesh Amiti, wants, we went into a discussion of Ratzon. Because Ratzon is one of the key operative instruments used, because without desire, nothing else flows. And desire, we learned about two levels of Ratzon, what they call revealed Ratzon or concealed Ratzon, or the power of desire, or desire. Different words, machshava, Ratzon mamish. One is a determination that is absolutely an inspired state, because before the determination, there was no Ratzon. There is no Ratzon. And then there's a second state of active pursuit of whatever the objective desire is. Then that moved to the next level. He started speaking that though Ratzon, desire, is a koyach makif, basically in the words of, in the energy levels, the word of Sevav, transcendent energy, yet in transcendence itself, there's also levels. Because it travels through the imminent energy of Pnimi. As we spoke from the Eitz Chaim, that the Igulim, which is the makif of each level and throughout the entire cosmic order, is formed through the kav, which is the stylus, so you could say the paintbrush, the pen, through which all creation is drawn through. So therefore, the makif, therefore, is being affected by the Pnimi. In other words, he doesn't say it explicitly, but basically, since the kavana is pnimi, because you want to have an existence of structure and you want to have an internalized relationship with the divine, so the makiv is also impacted by that, because that's the ultimate intention. The intention is not to remain removed from existence, but to become internalized into existence. And yet, it should still retain transcendent properties. So that's the delicate balance of the two. So he explained how the pnimi, the pnimi affects the makiv to be able to, so therefore the makiv also assumes levels. However, it's not quite the same levels as a pnimi, but it still has levels, and a level where you have that the details can emerge there, all within the desire. Yeah, that's where we're up to, in middle of page 56. Where he explained the difference between the Igulim of Atzilus, the Igulim of Ak, how they have different types of impact. So we see that there are levels. I explained at length the meaning and purpose behind it. It just makes the integration and the interface so much stronger when they're all working together. And I gave examples for this in the last class. I'm not going to go over that. I'm just going to continue reading from middle of page 56. So, the line begins, If you go to ayinbeis.com, you can find the PDF pages of these, of what we're learning right now, the actual text. And also, if you're not part of the group yet, we have a group, a WhatsApp group called Ayin Beis, where we post all these, the audio of all these classes, and you can feel free to participate. Just chat in the Zoom here, or in the YouTube chat your number, and we'll add you to the group. Okay. So the flow here is like this. He says, I'm reading from closer to the top of the page. That just like we explained that Rotzen, desire, has in it details, because it's already relating to what it desires. So this, what's the dugma lamayla? That seviv has levels. It begins with a klolia, all-encompassing type of energy, and as it extends, it becomes a specific energy, a rotzen prati. And the reason for it is because tamadover de'era seviv lefisha hamshacha derech er pnimi. Because the hamshacha comes through the immanent energy. It's like I explained with the artist. Even when he's painting, he's actually painting. He's ready to paint he's painting the canvas. So he's not just conveying through his brush the details. Within it, he's also conveying the spirit and the desire and the transcendence that lies in all the details. It's all being carried through that brush. Okay. Then he went on to explain the difference of levels of igulim, which we already learned. So I'm going now to the line that begins yeser. Said the difference between the bittul of the makif. In general, makif affects bittul in existence. Pinimi creates things, and makif creates awe. It evokes awe because it's above. It's always something beyond us. If we only had pinimi, we would relate to it, but we wouldn't sense something that is beyond us. Makif is beyond us, as I said, transcendent. But there's a difference between the bittul that Ah creates, which is more of a bittul, they called it that's concealed, and the makifim of Atzilus, at the Kanarich, they create a bittul that's more sensed and experienced by Bechins Gili Behergish, more experienced by the entities. This is new, we haven't learned this. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe's addition to what we learned. This all was quoted from page 1148 in volume 2 of Ayin Beis, and now he says like this. Frierdiker Rebbe is writing his addition now. Like it says elsewhere, the Eser Keches HaNefesh, Heim Eser Sfiras Datzilus. Okay, that's in Tanya, in Pei Gimel.
I think you skipped now.
The 10 faculties of the. One second, are you asking a question on what I'm reading now or what I said till now?
No, but you're reading now.
What are you asking? I didn't read yet. No, we're not reading that. It's the wrong line. The line begins, Gili v'her yoser. It's a different line. The Eser Keches HaNefesh, Heim Eser Sfiras Datzilus. The 10 faculties of the soul are rooted, are derived from the 10 spheres of Atzilus. So the 10 spheres of Atzilus, we call them divine attributes. Chochma of Atzilus is Chochma of Elikus, Bina of Elikus, Das, Chesed of Elikus. From there, it evolves to Bria, Yetzir, Asiya, and ultimately into the Nefesh HaAdam. The human spirit, the human being has a spirit, has 10 keches, 10 faculties. Shenishtalshlu mehen is the language used in Tanya, and the Frierdiker Rebbe actually quoted it earlier, a few pages earlier. Yeah. So what do we have? So the 10 faculties, our chokhmah in our mind, our bina, our das, our chesed, gvur teferes, originates from the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Varausa deliba, nekudas hayadus v'keich hamesiris nefesh shebekol echad miyisrael. Now, beyond the 10 faculties, remember the faculties is an avodah al pitam v'das. It's a rational and also a very tangible type of avodah. It's true, Tam B'das is Chabad, but even avodah from Ava v'Yira, Chesed and Gvura, it's palpable love and awe of God. That we have attraction to godliness, and we have a respect for it. So either the faculties, in the way they function, like it is in the spheres of Atzilus, they are what we call immanent, internalized faculties that are very defined. And yes, you can align them, and we need to align them to godliness. You learn Torah, you're using Chabad Shebenefesh, your mind, your intelligence, your Chachma Bina Das, and you're learning God's Torah, and you're understanding it. When you're giving tzedakah, when you give charity, or you do achnasas archim, or other acts of gemilas chasadim, of kindness, you are using your chesed, aligning it with chesed of Atzilus. That it should be a chesed dedicated toward what God wants us to use our chesed for. So that's what we call the structured Aveda, a structured Aveda. But then there are things that we have also within our spirit ability to go beyond structure, which he's now going to compare to the Makif. All I said now was Pnimi. Whether it's the 10 spheres of Atzilus or the 10 faculties of the Nefesh, that's Pnimim. That's Keiches and Eiris Pnimim. Eir Keli. Everything is, as I said, structured, it's palpable, it's tangible, it's imminent. But then there are faculties, there are experiences that are beyond the regular structure of a human being. And he says three things. He says, Ru'usa Deliba, Nukuda Sayadus, V'keyach HaMesiris Nefesh, that's within every Jew. Let me just explain those three. Generally, they're different, obviously. I mean, specifically, they're different levels. But overall, they all go into the world of Makifim. They're not the world of Pnimim. What's Ru'usa Deliba? Ru'usa is Rotzen in Aramaic. It's the Rotzen in the heart. It's the essential, it's similar to the Ava Misuteres that we read about in Tanya. Not exactly, because Ru'usa Deliba, the Rebbe has a whole letter, has many different levels. But overall, it means the inherent desire in the heart of a neshama that is connected to God. It's similar to what we learned about Ratzon Atzmi, that the child and the parent have a inherent connection. So it's a Ratzon. It's not Seichel. It's not based on Seichel. A parent and a child, remember we learned on page 54, or actually, no, I'm sorry, 52. Page 52 and 53, the bottom of 52, we learned it's not based on Seichel. It's not based because the child is behaving in a certain way, so the father or the parent loves the child. They behave a different way. No, remember we said, this is your child. It's forever your child. Makes no difference whether it's begoli or not begoli. It's a state of being. So the Usa Daliba is a hardwired rotzen in the heart of the neshama Yisrael, that connects to God. Then he says the next expression, Nukudas Hayadus, which overall is the same thing. You say the Pintele Yid, the spark, the Nukudas Hayadus. The Alter Rebbe speaks in chapter 18 and 19 in Tanya that even a Kal Shebekalim, even someone that completely is very lenient is not ostensibly Shemet Mitzvahs has. We push them to the wall. They have the Kudas Hayadus, which then he calls it Koyach HaMesiris Nefesh, the power to give their life. Mesiris Nefesh can be physical life, it could be spiritual life, it could be Mesiris Harotzen. But the Frierdiker Rebbe uses all three terms, but all of them are makif. They're not pnimi. They're not a specific faculty. They're an intense energy and power of a person to go beyond themselves. So he says, so now he's saying, so these things, Nukusa Deliba, Nukudas Hayadus, Keich HaMesiris Nefesh, Shebechol Echad V'Echad Misro, Huma Ein Sof Shalamayla Matzilus. Where does that originate from? In the structure. If the 10 faculties of the person of the Nefesh come from the 10 spheres of Atzilus, so that's from the infinite higher in Atzilus, which in the language we're using here, Rotzen, Keser, makif, igulim. This is the igulim in the person, just like the igulim of Atzilus is atik and arich in a human being. It's the igulim of these three things, the makif, that the power of bittul that comes from Rusa Deliba, that's bittul. Remember we said earlier before, Seviv affects us with bittul. Mamala kalalmin pnimi affects us in who we are. It's internalized. It's not transcendent that you are now in awe or nullified before something greater than you are. So he's now explaining in Aveda what this is. So this is, he says, this is from Eretz of Shalamayla Matzilus. Hare, what do we see from this? The Gambe Makifim Shem B'chinas Eira Seviv. That also in the Makifim Eira Seviv, Yesh Gamkin Chilukei Fanim B'madregosam. There's also a distinction of the levels in there, in a distinction between one level and another. So the Frierdiker Rebbe added, in Ayin Beis, he didn't talk about this Avodah. He talked about the bittul of Ak and Atzilus, but here he brought into these words that we just read. Shekol, so he says, Shekol zeh. So there's levels in this Aveda. He doesn't explain where the levels in Mesiras Nefesh and in Rusa Deliba, but you have to say there are levels. Shekol zeh, why are there levels? Hu mipnei, he's going back to the beginning of the subject. Sham shochahu derech ha'er pnimi. Why there are levels in a transcendent energy that's beyond structure is because they're transmitted. The Makif too, Er Seviv, is transmitted through the channel of the immanent energy. Uliyah Shabbat Derech Ha'er Pnimi. And being that the transcendent, the Seviv, the Makif, comes through Er Pnimi, Harigama Er Makif Bo B'Bchinas Chilukim Madreges Elu. So also the Er Makif also comes and assumes distinct levels, the same distinct levels. Not quite the same way, but it's impacted by it. So if you had two tracks, as I pointed out, let me say it again. Let's say one track creates structure, Pnimi, Esespheres of Atzilus, 10 faculties in the soul. Fine. Then there's another track, completely unrelated. Another track brings Bligvul into existence, the sense of awe, a sense of something beyond us all. But it's a second track. They don't speak to each other. It's like two different tracks. This track is called Keser, Rotzen, Makif, Seviv, Igulim, Mesiras Nefesh, Rusa Deliba, Nekudas Hayadus, I'm sorry, Rusa Deliba, Nekudas Hayadus, Mesiras Nefesh, Kayach Mesiras Nefesh. It's a second track. So basically, a human being, we'll talk on the human level, has two things: the way you serve God through your faculties. You use your mind to learn Torah, you use your chesed to give tzedakah, you use your gvura for Yiras Hashem. You know, everyone tiferes, like we say, l'cha Hashem hagdula, hagvura v'atiferes. And every one of your spheres, every one of your faculties, you align to the spheres. Then there's a second thing. Comes Yom Kippur, for example, stimulates the koyach ha-mesiras nefesh, yechida sheba nefesh, makifim sheba nefesh, chai yechida. All year round, or most of the time in regular Aveda, is nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is, by the way, chabad chagas nihi. Neshama is chabad, ruach is chagas, chesed gvur teferes, and nihi is nefesh, is nihi. But then comes another Aveda, mesiras nefesh, yechida. You're suddenly ready to go completely beyond yourself, the essential love we have to God, which is beyond the faculties. We know that you need both. Hashem wants both. He wants a relationship on the immanent, but you could argue it's two different tracks. As such, the makif is not affected by the pnimi, but the Eibishter didn't make it that way. He made that the makifim, the keiches ha-makifim, in the language of Chai Yechida, which he doesn't use here, but I'm using, that the makifim, they don't go as a separate track. They also enter into existence through the pnimi, through the kav. As such, they relate more also to the structure. So in other words, it's not just that you have mesiras nefesh and you go outside of your faculties. Even your faculties can be elevated through the mesiras nefesh. Mesiras nefesh permeates even the pnimi. He doesn't say this explicitly. I'm just spelling out what the Aveda would be an application from this. But bottom line, what he wants to say here is that even Seviv has levels. That's why we said before, when the Ratzon, desire for creation is not just a general desire. It comes down into levels. Ratzon is pratim. He wants these specific details, and if you don't do these details, the Ratzon is not complete. It's not just, I want a world. I want a specific world. So Ratzon is a Ratzon for the Esses Firis. I want Esses Firis. I don't just want Ratzon. So therefore, Ratzon has within it some form of structure relatively speaking, that it assumes because it's now communicating and traveling through the Pnimi. Okay.
The Oyer Pnimi is creating the Chiluke Madreges, or even without the Oyer Pnimi, there are Chiluke Madreges in the Eretz Seviv.
He says that he just gave the whole reason that there would be no, that it's because it goes through the Pnimi. That's why they're Chiluke Madreges. Said explicitly, didn't say they were before. Whether potentially, who knows? But he says the whole reason. He says Tam Hadover, the Eira Sever Baba Chilukim Adreis will Fisham Shechaser Derech Er Pnimi. You could argue that God's kavona is Er Pnimi, so the Ratzon is, let's put it this way, is receptive to go through the Er Pnimi, which essentially means it will be somewhat shaped by it. But the bottom line is that remember, let's not talk technical. Remember the punchline here is this, that God wanted to create existence in a way where there was a relationship between the highest levels and the lowest levels. So one of the ways to do it is to try to make sure they speak to each other. If Makif remains Bligvul and has no levels, and it's just God wants existence, and levels only are related to Er Pnimi, you have a cutoff where the interface is not complete. Because you could say the details of existence are not relevant to the Ratzon. He wants to say they're relevant, that God cares about the details. He's not just doesn't want a home. He wants a home with details that we're going to learn now more in more specifics. So even the Makif, even the Eir that relates to Atzmos, which means a higher level that's not yet a Pnimi, it's not yet part of structure, also is beginning to sense and cares about and already envisions, he said before. He said, is it Tzir? He used the words, Atzir Prati. That the desire is already envisioning, and we'll soon say even more than envisioning. It actually allocates and designates resources toward. I keep telling you, go back to the mashal, or else you're going to lose Havana here. The mashal I'm giving here is the artist or the builder of a home, if you wish. That before the building happens, the Ratzon has to spell out in detail, what is it you want? I'm sitting with you. You're telling me you want a home. I'm your builder. I'm your architect. I say, what do you want in the home? You'll say, I just want a home. It's not enough. You have to say, I want to have 10 rooms. I want the rooms to be these sizes. I want to use the home. What's the function of the home? All the details. We're going to learn it now. So in Ratzon, you already have a tzir that's beginning to shape and envision. Is it a home yet? No, because there's a desire doesn't create. It needs to get into implementation stage. But without direction, without a blueprint of details, so the Ratzon has the details in them. He's explaining, how does it have details? Because it's nimshach through the Er Pnimi. Okay. Now you could ask the question, where's the Er Pnimi? There's no Er Pnimi yet. What do you mean it's nimshach through the Er Pnimi? So because the whole example he gave with the Eitz Chaim is after the Tzimtzum. So we still have to understand where's the Er Pnimi play a role before the Tzimtzum, when the whole Ratzon precedes Er Pnimi. And yet he said that point. And yet he said that it does travel through the Er Pnimi. So we're going to learn this, and I'll explain it with what he's going to say now, which, by the way, goes back. He's going to explain everything now is from Ayin Beis. This is all the language of Ayin Beis. I will point out when the Frierdiker Rebbe starts adding to Ayin Beis. So far, he added the piece with the Mesiras Nefesh, but now it's back to the language in Ayin Beis. So here's what the Rebbe Rashab says. Frierdiker Rebbe says, which is the language of the Rebbe Rashab. And like an example, Adam kishemeser b'ritzeni livnei bayis. A person who's inspired in his desire to build a home. This desire is a general desire. In general, he wants a home. No details yet. I want a home. I want a home to live in. It doesn't even say to live. A home, a house. And you don't yet recognize within this desire the detailed desires, in the specific elements that are in the actual chemre means the actual materials of building a home. Ukamoi, avonim, eitzim, v'afar, stones, wood, and earth. So when you say, I want a home, a house, you're not getting into what are the specific materials, what this house is going to be built from. The gamloi, also in this ratzon klali, in this general desire, also, you don't yet know.
Chadorov.
You don't yet know the details of the shape of the home according to the rooms. How many rooms? What kind of rooms? And for sure, and for sure, you don't know about the furniture, the kalim, the furniture of the home that will be masimim, fitting and appropriate for the different rooms of the home. So a couch in the living room, a table in the dining room, a stove or a refrigerator in the kitchen, just examples. So bottom line is, he said three things that, as examples, that is still a ratzon klali. Number one, the materials from which the house is built. Number two, the shape and form of the rooms of the home. And number three, for sure, not the kalim and what's going to occupy the home. Dovar, al mekeme haroyeloi. That continues from the line before. That each of these kalim, each of this furniture, each item by item, fitting to the right place it belongs. All that is not included in the ratzon klali, which has not yet been defined by details. Now he continues. By the way, the last line with the furniture is not in Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis only talks about the first two things. The Frierdiker Rebbe added about the kalim. Why? I'm not sure, but I'm just pointing that out. Let me see. I want to make sure I'm right. Yeah. He also doesn't talk about the shape, the tzir of the chadarim, the rooms. Just says be'efen habayis. Okay, fine. Now he continues. That's the first step when you're inspired to have a home. We only talked about the first step. Now he's going to go the next step. And now when he applies his mind in the details of this home, because next step is going to be, okay, I wanted a home, now what? Next question is, your mind starts contemplating and thinking, okay, what kind of home do you want? Says now he uses seichel. Suddenly seichel is coming into the picture. That when seichel comes, the prate inyan habayis, I'm just comparing it to Ayin Beis. I want to see the language. Shabbat b'seichel v'prate is inyan habayis. Nasim ritzenis pratim, I'll call dover befrat. So now in other words, the mind comes and starts breaking it down. Now it breaks down into ritzenis pratim. Not just one general desire, I want a home, a desire with desires within that general desire of the details. I'll call Dover Befrat, every detail specifically. Okay, now he continues. So we have here 2 stages in this example. All this, however, all that we just discussed, whether it's the Ratzon Klali, the general desire, or the specific, is only after there was an inspiration. It came after there was a Seder's Bizgalus, an inspiration or stimulation or arousal, something that awoke the person in a revealed way. In other words, before the Ratzon Klali, there was no Ratzon altogether. Not any conscious way, as we learned, and we will learn. So these 2 levels are both after Hisedus. Now he goes back, this is the mushal. What's the nimshal? What do we derive from this regarding our discussion here above the way God did it? The example for this above, who who this is an example for seviv, for the eir, that's still in a form of transcendent and encompasses the worlds. It's a rotzen for the worlds, but it's not the worlds themselves. How this rotzen, this seviv, has a relationship with the pnimi. So now he's explaining how the pnimi comes into the picture, because the rotzen is starting to relate to specifics. And being in a state that has a relationship with pnimi is the structure, the specific details, and the structure. It is only when this ratzon or this makif has a relationship and relating to and engaging with, or in some way relating to envisioning the pnimi, has some relationship with the pnimi, which is the structure of existence. Only then can you make a distinction in that makif itself between a makif aklali, we said like the ratzon klali, a general transcendent energy, u'mashabo b'makif aprati, and that which comes into a makif aprati, a more specific, relating to more specifics. I'm just looking at Ayin Beis. I want to see comparison. The Lamaila who Kamosha Air becomes okay. So let me explain before we get lost here. What he's saying, and this is we have learned already in Ayin Beis. So the truth is, this should have been discussed. We did discuss it, but it doesn't hurt to go over again. He made a statement, the key statement, that all this is after there's a Hisedus. There's a desire, there's an inspiration for desiring a home. So this is also true Lamaila, that there's a state where it becomes conscious, the desire for creation. But that is only after there's already a Hisedus. Something is already shifted. It's not Ein Sof, as we're going to learn soon, that's beyond everything. We're not talking about Atzmi. If you remember, Atzmi, we learned in Ayin Beis, he's going to discuss it soon. That's beyond. There's nothing, there's no relationship altogether. All it is revealing Atzmos. Here there's a relationship. In the there's already a relationship. That's the Ratzon. Maxey says that Ratzon is already relating to something. If you remember, in the last pages, we learned about the Ratzon. He said, even though, going back a page before, even though the Heskem v'Hechlet, the determination, he said, is higher than actively pursuing, because determination is a general determination, but he said it's lower than Etzem HaNefesh. Remember, he said it's a Yerida. Yeah. Because koydem haheskem harei hoise ba'atzmusa mamish u'mufshetes u'mishmizlalas dover zulasa. So if you recall, in essence, you could call it a third level. So there's a level where the nefesh, or in this case, the oyer atzmi, or the higher levels of oyer, are just a reflection of the source. There's nothing, no inspiration to relate to anything outside of yourself. Then there's a state where there's a heseridus, an inspiration to have a relationship. But at first stage, it's just a determination. It's not pursuing it. And therefore, it's not relating to the specifics. However, you could say it's already the source for the ratzon that will relate to the specifics. So in that sense, the whole idea that a makif, that he's saying here, is already desiring something, desiring a home, even though you have not broken into details, you've already began the beginnings of a relationship with another. It's just not broken down yet. So that's what he's saying. All this comes after there's been a inspiration. We didn't discuss yet the level pre-inspiration here. We're going to discuss it. So right now, both levels, whether it's makif kloli or makif prati, meaning a ratzon kloli in general for a home, and the specific desires, what type of home, what materials, what kind of rooms, what furniture, etc., that is all after there's the stimulation or the inspiration. That's what he says here. So the words he's using, that means that there's a shaykhus to the pnimi. Because if the desire remains aloof and removed, then it doesn't have a relationship to the structure that you want to build. So he's saying, therefore, what we learned before, that the makif gets details due to the pnimi, what it really means, lifnei tzimtzum, is the makif is envisioning what the pnimi is going to bring. There's no pnimi yet, but it's envisioning the pnimi and therefore starts relating to the specifics of that pnimi, which is the specifics of the home. That's how I would explain those words, because he says those words. He says these words. In other words, you're talking about Seviv that's already relating to the pnimi, but there's no pnimi yet. The kav will not come till after the tzimtzum. So you have to say in the ratzon that is aroused and inspired, there's the envisioning of the pnimi. That's the shaykhus ala pnimi. Once it has that, in other words, it's being told that you're going to have a relationship with pnimi, with a structure, with specifics, and so on. Or shaykh, then you can make a distinction in the seviv itself between a makif klali, a general desire, and the details. What's interesting here is that even the ratzon klali, he says, you couldn't make that distinction unless there was a shaykhus ala pnimi. In other words, the inspiration that comes, that even brings the general determination, the general desire, without details, that stimulation is already being affected by pnimi. Why? Because it's a stimulation for a home. It's not a stimulation just like that. So even though you haven't yet thought about the details, the ratzon hasn't come into details, I should say, but the fact that there's already now an active desire, not active in pursuit, active as a determination, ratzon klali is already a result because pnimi is beginning to emerge in the consciousness of the oir. That's what it seems like he's saying. Because you could make the argument, if I may, you could say since Atzmus, okay, Atzmus is removed from everything. Since Ein Sof is Pashut, B'tachlis Apshitas, Ein Sof has no shape and no form. All it is divine energy. It's energy that's reflecting whatever Atzmus reflects through it. Like sunlight in that sense. Sunlight has no shape and form. Sunlight doesn't adjust to any of the details. It shines. It shines in one place equal to another place. It's like an air makif, if you want, in a certain way. But we're not talking about the air makif. It's completely. So where suddenly does a pnimi come into play? Why is there a ratzon that will become a ratzon prati? So you have to say, even though it doesn't say this explicitly, but I'm saying you have to say that the Ein Sof has within it, even the completely shapeless, seamless Ein Sof has within it embedded what the Eibishter wants. He wants a dira b'tachtein. So it's true. On that level, the only thing that matters is Atzmus wants a dira b'tachtein. Wants is not the right word. Nesava. Dira b'tachtein. He wants a dira. But because that to have a dira, you're going to need details, because that's the only way you can build a dira is by a structured existence. So even though the structure hasn't begun, the building for sure not. Even the envisioning hasn't begun. So slowly what will happen, not in time, conceptually, that in this Ein Sof will emerge a Ratzon Klali. We're not talking about the Ratzon Amuchel Batzmusei. It will emerge a conscious desire to have a home. Now that conscious desire is being informed by Atzmus's Kavana. That conscious desire will then turn into a desire that has details in it. So the process has begun. And ultimately, yes, Eses Sfiras Hagnuzus, Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, in the infinite possibilities of the artist, even beyond infinite possibility, even beyond artistry, will emerge one specific vision for the Eses Sfiras. So there's no 10 spheres yet, but they all emerge because that's the Kavanah. So the Kavanah begins to become realized not in the Atzmus Ha'er, but in the Ratzon, first as a general desire, and then as it breaks down into specific desire. So if you remember, when we talked about the artist's mind, let's go back to the artist. He doesn't even know he's an artist. He never thinks about art and so on. It's something else entirely. Then comes the moment that he's aware that he is an artist, and he's aware and then he becomes aware, I want to create art. Now, because the kavanah is art means a specific form of art, it's not just a conceptual thing. So the process has begun. Then will come a stage where he will specify what type of art, all in the Ratzon. No one else knows except him because he hasn't done it yet. Then he will allocate resources, and then will come a tzimtzum, and they will begin actually crafting the art that he envisioned. So what's informing the makif to have these details is because the kavanah of Panimi is there all the way in the beginning, except it's not obvious. Later or earlier in Ayin Beis, we learned that the Eibishter wanted to have a structure of existence, but Lifnei HaTzimtzum, it's completely overwhelmed by the Bligvul overwhelms the Eir HaGvul. And you need the Tzimtzum to separate. Because if the artist remains in his own infinite possibilities, even though he's envisioning one art, it's too intense. He's going to have to somewhere make a stop and say, I don't want to be thinking. I don't want to be relating to my infinite possibilities, because infinite possibilities overshadows one finite possibility. So you need, at some point, there's going to be the tzimtzum that's going to say, okay, it's like, let's say I want to have a home. You've broken into details, the details of the home. Here's, I think, a good example. You're sitting now with the architect and the contractors, and you're ready to build. And suddenly you or your wife says, you know what? I want a different room. I come to think of it, I want 5 different rooms. They say, 1 second, did you make a decision or didn't you make a decision? And many times people say, I have to rethink it again. If you're going to start going back to all the possibilities that the Ratzon can have, and you haven't come to a specific determination of specifics, you can spend your whole life saying, no, I don't like it this way, I want it this way. That's why there's a point in Ratzon where you say, this is the plan. Now you can start saying, now let's get this plan happening. It can't constantly be going back to the Eir HaBligvul and say, let's rethink the whole thing because maybe there's other possibilities. Once Hashem makes the decision, Eses Sfiras, even though embedded in there are all the Ein Ketz and Ein Sof and the highest levels, but it's not going to come down, you know what, maybe let's make an 11th Sfira. Or let's change Chochmah and we'll call it another Sfira. This is now the way it's going to manifest. So what you have here is a very complex and also elegant process of how Bligvul and Gvul interact with each other. So Bligvul represents more Atzmus, more the higher levels of divine infinity. And then the Gvul, the Eir HaGvul begins, which is Pnimi, is focusing on what that Atzmus wants. And they work with each other and they inform each other. So the Pnimi is informing the Makif, and of course, the Makiv is informing the Pnimi, though he's not focusing on that right now. And you need both. One brings bittul, one brings structure. So the structure of Pnimi is impacting the makif, that it shouldn't remain aloof, that it should already relate to, at least in the Ratzon level, to the specifics that it will ultimately be implemented. And remember that in every Esser Spheres, there's a Keser. There's Keser of Chochmah, there's Keser of Bina. So there's a Ratzon in everything. So there's a makif in every Pnimi, which drives the Pnimi. And the Pnimi, because it's the Kavana, is telling the makif, and the makif assumes not, the makif doesn't become a Pnimi, but it's makif of Chochmah is different than makif of Bina, like we learned before, that the Igulim of Ak are different than the Igulim of Atzilus. Is there a point where there's one Igul where everything is equalized? Yes. But then there's also levels in Makifim. How could there be levels? So his answer is because it's the Pnimi is speaking to the Makif, because that's the Kavanah. The Eibishter wants Makif and Pnimi to speak to each other. And this brings me back, if you remember when we were learning Ayin Beis a week ago, 2 weeks ago, this was essential in the beginning of Ayin Beis when he spoke. The whole Ayin Beis begins that there's 3 levels in Keser. Remember 3 definitions of Keser? Silence, pause, the highest level. Then Keser as a crown, and then Keser as a encompassing, surrounding all of existence. So he said there's 3 levels in Makifim, and a big part of Ayin Beis in the beginning was how could there be levels in Makifim? So he went to explain that there are 3 levels in Spheres. Remember? Number, story, sapir, transparency. And then he says, so therefore the Makif, which relates to Pnimi, also has subtly 3 levels. One that relates to existence, one that's removed, and one that's completely beyond it all. Like Sasum Be'etzem. Then there's Sasum Fierech, and then there's Arich that relates to existence. So bottom line is, what's emerging from this is that there is a true relationship between godliness and existence, but there are levels, because one level is closer to the godly of it, the other is closer to the existence part, which ultimately is going to come back to the 2 levels of Ayin. The Ayin that reflects Elikus, and the Ayin that relates to existence. So now we are seeing it in the Ratzon, but the Ratzon is being informed by the Pnimi. That's how I would explain this piece, because remember he said it's the reason there's in Ratzon levels is because the Pnimi is causing it there. So you'll say, why does it have to cause it? Why can't the Makif just have levels? God said, I want my Ratzon to have levels in it, because he wants the Ratzon to retain its aloofness. He wants it to retain an element that's beyond. And let me explain what that means. When you plan, let's say, building a home, and you make the plan, you come to Ratzon Klali and the Ratzon Prati, everything is in place. They start building the home, just walking it through. Then one day you, the owner, the one who had the Ratzon in the first place, comes and you say, 1 second, this is not exactly turning out the way I liked it. Doesn't look like. So you go, what do? You go back to the blueprint. You know, maybe there was something lost in translation here, in communication. You go back to the blueprint and you say, hey, you're not building it according to the blueprint. There's something missing or something added or whatever, babe. Why do you need the blueprint? Because the blueprint is your reality check. It's the only thing you can go back to and say, 1 second, there's a plan. You have to go by the plan. So if the Ratzon would lose its power of being a Ratzon, which means reflecting what you want, the building could end up going on a wild goose chase. You could end up being who knows where. So that's why the Eibishter doesn't want the Ratzon to lose its intensity of reflecting my desire. It wants the Ratzon to know that there are details, and wants the Ratzon to relate to the details, but it still always has to be a Ratzon that's not detached from the Etzem. So the Ratzon is like so-called preserves the integrity because it's connected to what you want. And then come the levels of actual Pnimi, that's already involved in the actual process of creation. So essentially the Ratzon keeps the Pnimi honest. The Pnimi fulfills what the ultimate kavanah is to actually build a specific structure. So when we look in the Torah, for example, we say the Torah is the Torah is always a reality check to say, what does God really want? That's why when you could sit and have a whole shakvetari and nigla and halacha, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you come to a conclusion that the psak is so-and-so. Then someone says, hold on a second. Your logical conclusion does not stem with what God said. In Torah Shebiksav, the pasuk says so-and-so. So you always need the Ratzon to be the reality check, because once you get into execution and implementation, you can wander away from what Hashem really wants. I'll just give an example. It's an interesting example. I think I mentioned it. In the times in Russia, so there were plenty of tzaras. One of them was the Maskilim. The Maskilim from Germany and France and Central Europe. They made it their mission that they have to assimilate and modernize the Jewish people who were living in primitive past. So they were trying to implement all kinds of things, Sidurim in German. The children should have a secular education. It was a milchama. It was a real milchama. It's documented in the Sefer, in the Kuntres, the Friedrich Rebbe wrote about Tzemach Tzedek and the Tnuas HaSkola. But it continued at Reb Marash's time, the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab and Reb Chaim Brisker were the two Gdelim, the biggest Gdelim in Russia at the time. Brisk was also there. And there were a lot of Rabbanim. But they were respected and they worked together, even though very different schools of thought. But this was talking about Atzolas Yisrael, and they were both, obviously, and they worked together. So there were these different meetings they had. And the Maskilim, or the government, the Russian government, would present ideas. And there was 50 Rabbanim would be there, with Rab Chaim and the Rebbe Rashab presiding. And they would present. So they presented once an idea. I'm not sure what it was. I think it was printing a siddur with German on one side and Hebrew on the other. The Rabbanim, each one said their opinion. And many said, why not? Al pi halacha, you're allowed to do it. We print siddurim with English and other languages and Hebrew. It's not like... But then the last veto power was the Rebbe Rashab and the Reb Chaim. So the Rebbe Chaim said, they turned to Reb Chaim, no, what do you say? He could have said no, and it would have been bottled. They're not doing it. Now, we all knew it came from the Maskilim. It was not like they're interested in spreading Yiddishkeit to people who don't read Hebrew. They had their own agenda. Reb Chaim said he wants to hear what the Rebbe has to say. He's not going to say till he hears the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab heard, thought for a second, and said he does not accept this suggestion. When Reb Chaim heard that, he said, I agree with the Rebbe, bottle the ideas off the table. Afterwards, Reb Chaim asked the Rebbe Rashab privately. He says, between us, we both know halachically it's not an issue. So why was the Rebbe so against it? So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, from my youngest childhood, I trained myself that when something is not smacking from the ruach of Shulchan Aruch and halacha, even though that doesn't have a source, my whole body tenses up. And I know something's wrong. And I sensed this was not right. Not that I had a mocket and I didn't. I sensed the whole thing was not right. So Rebbe Rashab asked Reb Chaim, no, so why did you wait to defer to me? Why didn't you say your opinion? He says, because I don't have such a hergish. I wanted to hear what the Rebbe said. It's a Meredika story. What does it mean? It means sometimes it says expression, Metayir Asheretz b'shivim ponim. There people could be Metayir Asheretz, you can find Asheretz. You know what Asheretz is?
Bekan timing. Bekan timing.
Yeah, sometimes it says kan time. There's different expressions. That you could take a sheretz. A sheretz is a dead corpse, an animal. Obviously, sheretz is considered despicable, and it's usher in every possible way. You're not allowed to eat it, etc. But someone who's a big Talmud Chacham, Chmon al-Itzlan, can come and technically find all kinds of nuances and halacha and say here. What does that mean? That technically on paper, maybe he found some strange, bizarre thing, but it's not Torah. So in other words, it's not just the letter of the law. There's between the lines, the spirit. Not chas v'shalom against halacha ever, but there's some things that a person who's a ish ruchni, a Torah person is not going to say just whether it's technically right or wrong. It's not. But it's not right time. The tkuf for the people. The point I'm making here is the difference is one person may be connected to the Chochmah of Torah, and another person is connected to the Tzenish Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Torah. The Chochmah of Torah, so you follow the wisdom of Torah, and logic states like this, states like that. But someone who's wired, who is plugged in to the essence of what the Eibishter will, not just what it says on the paper. Then he's going to be far more sensitive and much more true. So there are a lot of people who had all kinds of good intentions. Look, let's be honest. You think that all the people that started different assimilation movements in Judaism was always bad intentions? No. They thought that they could have the best of both worlds. So we cut a corner here. How do you determine where you can make a vitur, a compromise, where not? It's not so poshut. You have to have a Yiras Shamayim, because we could all make mistakes. We could logically conclude all kinds of things that it's the right thing, but you need someone who's plugged into the Ratzon, not just to the Chochmah. My point I'm making here is just giving an example why Ratzon is so vital, because you want to know not just what God said to do. You want to know what God wants you to do. We know what God said. Now you want to know what his Ratzon is. That's why it says in the Gemara, in Baba Metzia, it says, someone who does not make a birchas hatera, right? So they barcha batera tchila. It says sof sof azevu terase azevu. He'll forsake Torah. Why? You didn't make a bracha, but you learn Torah. You're learning it with your mind. You're stimulated. You're excited about it. Because if you don't have a connection to the Nesanat Torah, the giver, yes, it's going to become another wisdom, lahavdil, another science, and you may be brilliant in it, but you lack that element. You lack the kedusha, the sanctity, and so on. I remember, without names, someone came to me years ago. He was a very fine person, and he was a very intellectual, the Baal Tshuva, and very into Yiddishkeit. He was already, he was working in different areas in Yiddishkeit and so on. But then his parents were academics, and they couldn't stand that he didn't get a college degree. And they kept making him crazy. And they said, you can have your beard and frum and all good zach, be a Chabadnik, but go to college at least. She was actually a president of one of the colleges in New York. So he decided he's going to go. I used to talk to me. So he said to me, what do you think? I said, look, if you feel you have to go, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're an adult. He was already married. He wasn't a bocher. But do me one favor. Don't take Jewish studies. Don't take a course in Jewish studies. She said, why not? That's the first course I was going to sign up for. That way I said, the day you take Jewish studies, you're going to stop believing in God. And Kachave, I remember with my own eyes, he took Jewish studies, he didn't listen. And the first thing, I remember he calls me, he said, one second, all these things we learn about Gemara, these were people, human beings. Rabbi Akiva came from a difficult past. Maybe that's why he said certain things. They totally humanized it to a science. It lost its kedusha. Now, I'm not talking about not being intellectual, but when you lose the kedusha, the sanctity, that these are tanoim, amaroim, people who are completely dedicated to what God wants, he completely lost that. He said to me, explain to me, how do you know Rabbi Akiva is not just like us? He lived a few thousand years earlier. And it was what he learned in Jewish studies, not in his classes on philosophy and in physics. It was in the Jewish studies. And I realized, I knew that's what happened. It's like someone teaching you music, but you lose the whole achluchius. You lose the whole spirit of it. You know the technicalities, and you see someone mechanically perfect. They don't get it. They're missing the spirit. And I'm just saying it as examples to explain that you can have a structure perfect, but you have to have the spirit of the Ratzon. That's why the Eibishter did not make that the Ratzon should become a Pnimi. He wants to preserve that this is God's will. But the will has to be informed by the Pnimi, because it has to build accordingly. And you want to have the structure within the Makif already, but you don't want the Makif to become a Pnimi. Just trying to explain it in very applicable, practical ways. And you want both. You want a constant reminder. On the other hand, a Ratzon without a Chochmah is missing the kavanah. Chochmah breaks it into details. You have to have a structured home. You can't just say, I want a home, or I want a home with 40 rooms, but it's only in my desire, the 40 rooms. No, you need actual 40 rooms, and you need to have people who are going to come and build it this way and that way. I've spoken many times about the difference between Betzalel and Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe tells Betzalel to build the Kalim. When you read Pashat Truma, what do you see? And then later, when he repeats it, build the Oren and the Menera and the Shulchan and the Mizbeach, etc. Then he talks about building the Yerias, the walls, and the structure. So Betzal comes to Moshe, and then later you see, Betzal comes to Moshe, he says, this is not the way you build a house. First you build the structure, then you bring the furniture in. That's what Betzal tells him. So Moshe says to Betzal, Botzel, Kale, yes, you're right. You're right. So what's going on here? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know that first you build a home before you, but he's so removed from reality. So Chassidus explains in a number of different ways, but the general explanation is because Moshe was the visionary. Moshe was talking about the kavanah of the Mishkan. The kavanah of the Mishkan is not building walls. It's not a structure. It's v'shechanti b'seicham. And where's going to be v'shechanti b'seicham? Primarily in the Aron, the Holy of Holies. So Moshe was not saying the order how to build a home. He was saying the order of priority that when you build it, no, the whole kavanah is that God should be here. But Saul was the architect. He had to implement. When you implement, you can't be distracted by vision. You have to now stand and say how you're going to build it, and we know this detail. So when you see someone on the 30,000 foot level who's a visionary, is usually not good at details. You give them details, they'll overlook things and they'll make mistakes. So, but Saul's job was implementation. Implementation. That's how you build it. So one, it says Taken Chassidus that the kavanah is pnimi. By the way, that's what it says in Mitzvah's Binyan Amigdash in Derech Mitzvah. Moshe understood the kavanah is the actual home and the pnimi of bringing elokus and pnimius. But in order to have pnimi, you need a makiv, because that's how you. So it's a little different. What I'm trying to convey was actually the opposite. That Moshe maintained the Ratzon Hashem and the kavanah, and Betzalel was the details of actual specific detail after detail. The point is, you always need two sides to preserve the integrity. You need to have a reflection. What does the Eibishter want? To build what he wants, you need the details and the pnimi, each level, Ak and Atzilus and Nesesviris and Bria, Yetzira, Sia, and all the specifics. So in many ways, when you say, for example, when you're serving God with your Keiches HaNefesh, with your Eser Keiches, that's the specifics. When you're serving God with Kabbalah Seil, or he doesn't use Kabbalah, Ru'usa Deliba, Nekudas Hayadis, Mesiris Nefesh, that's that hergish of the Rebbe Rashab. It's a hergish. It's more than just, I'm going to use my Chochmah Bina to serve God. It's a sense, I have a fundamental, as a Avon Ben, fundamental connection to what God is, and I sense what's right. It's not just, but obviously someone's going to say, I'm going to follow my life based on hergish. No. The Rebbe Rashab was Aish Halacha in every detail, Digdur Kal Shel Divrei Sofrim. But at times, someone can say, print German and Hebrew, Al Pi Halacha, not a problem. But the Rebbe Rashab knew what their kavanah was, knew that the whole goal of it was to start creating, and the next day they're going to say no more Hebrew and just German, just as an example. He already sensed it. The Rebbe was many times this way. You saw when the Rebbe was very adamant about the shtochim. Shtochim, right? The Rebbe returning land for peace. We all know, Pekuach Nefesh, Simen Shin Chavtes. Those remember the Rebbe yelling, Shabbosim after Fabrengens about that. Omi Yehudi. So I remember people asking a question. There was a story then, the first time they returned something was Yamit. Yamit was a little settlement in
Given
Sinai Desert.
away.
Huh?
Given away, not a town.
Yeah, given away, sorry. Yeah, because that's what they call it after the war. So Yamit was a little settlement in the northeast part of Sinai, of the Sinai Peninsula. And the Rebbe was very upset because it was the first time they actually gave it as a sign of goodwill or whatever. So Rabbi Isaac Shvei wrote to the Rebbe. It's an interesting story. He wrote to the Rebbe asking, why does the Rebbe say it's Pekuach Nefesh? It's one little settlement. It's not like it makes no difference if they have the settlement. And the Rebbe responded the following. He said, I see with my own eyes, I'll translate, that the train has left the station. And you don't start yelling when the train goes over the cliff. You start yelling when it leaves the station. In other words, the Rebbe sensed that this was the beginning of much more. So of course, if you talk about technically, Yamit was not Pekuach Nefesh. No, it's not. It was not on the border. It wasn't like you give away Yamit, you open yourself up to attack. It was a small settlement. But the Rebbe says, with my own eyes, I see. I'm saying the Rebbe didn't say that. He saw where it's coming. He understood the spirit of what was going on. So a lot of things, like people said, why is the Rebbe speaking about Mi Yehudi and not about the Netuchim Mesim? which was autopsies, or Giyus Noshim, drafting women into the army, because the Rebbe understood what a Yesod of a Yesod is, that the Yismi Yehudi touches a fundamental essence of Yiddishkeit. My point is, it's not always technically what looks right or wrong, it's understanding the deeper Ruach and the Ratzon Hashem, the Teich Kol Inyanim. Anyway, I just felt I wanted to explain it a little more, and with all these abstract ideas, it's good to bring it down to earth a little. Okay. So, to continue back here, he says, so the Makif is assuming levels based on the fact that it's relating to the Pnimi. So here we use the word b'shaychus ala Pnimi. Hinerak o shaych lechalik b'ze atzmei mashaba b'makiv ha'klol mashaba b'makiv ha'prati. Omnom. Now he's going to go deeper back. This is all one's is a rotzen b'yisederus. There's already an inspired desire. So now you have a desire, general desire, you have specific desires. Omnam, however, going backwards now, Yadua, the eir makiv kamoishu be'etzem, the eir makiv, the way it's be'etzem, not the way it's already relating to and envisioning and relating to pnimi. Kamoishu be'etzem, it has altogether no relationship to existence, to the worlds. Gam loy b'bchinas makiv klal ala elamis. Not even a state of makif. We don't even call it makif ala elamis. So of course, then the question is, why do you call it makif altogether? Makif means surrounding, encompassing, transcending. Don't call it makif, call it eir atzmi. So this is the answer that Rebbe Rashab gives, and the Friedrich Rebbe is just quoting the Rebbe Rashab. This is straight lines from Ayin Beis. And so the fact that it's called Er Makif is not because it relates to the elements, because it's surrounding or encompassing them. It's primarily it's a way of saying it's removed from the worlds. So the Makif could mean it relates from a distance, it's like it relates, but it's removed. No, here you're focusing, they're completely removed. The intention here is not that it's makif aleim from an outside, it's like surrounding them or above them. It's not even above. Till now, we were talking about makif that relates to existence. So you could say it's above existence, the rotzen, the desire that wants the home, the specifics that it envisions, the desire that the desire formulates, I should say. So there, you could say makif ala ilms. But he says, be'etzem, however, makif be'etzem is not even that. So here it's removed completely. So the word makif is not meant to be, it relates to and it's above. It's completely beyond. I know you could still ask the question, so why couldn't you find another word not to create confusion? Because the word makif, by definition, means it relates to something. That's why you call it makif. I'm just thinking out loud. One answer could be because at the end of the day, he's going to say now, it's going to ultimately become the makif that does relate. So maybe that's why. Or who says maybe makif by definition can just be it's removed and it's not relating. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud as I read it. But he clearly says here that a makif be'etzem, k'moshu be'etzem, ein shayches klal.
Like you said, makif means it's not pnimi. It's separated. But it's a good question.
No, that's why, yeah. But then he continues. Look at the next line. Maybe this is the answer. Rak la'achar kach, gam hu bo liyas b'chinas makif al kapanim. Afterwards, of course, not in time. In the next level is going to become a makif al kapanim. Maybe that's what he's answering now. Maybe he's answering that. That's why he calls it that way. In other words, here the ikir primary focus is on being removed completely. But there's going to be a stage where it's going to be a makif al kapanim. It will, in other words, be a makif that relates but's above existence. Asher kein hu gam be'erein sof shalifnei atzimtzum. Now he's applying it. Now, this is how it is, Asher kein hu. And so is it also in the infinite light, divine light, before the tzimtzum. The atzmus erein sof baruch hu ein begeder shaychas elemis klal. The core essence of Ein Sof there's no relationship with existence at all. It's just the divine expression, like we discussed and learned. V'yesh madreges gam be'erein sof shalifnei hatzimtzum shem b'chinas shaychus ha'leilus. There are levels also before the tzimtzum that have some relationship with existence. Now, if you may recall, I discussed this at length when we learned Ayin Beis, a letter from the Rebbe. So I again refer you. I don't want to go over all of it again. I would just refer you. If you want to know exactly which program it was, just go to earlier in the WhatsApp group and look for the page 1148 in Ayin Beis. And I discussed at length what this means. Because what does it mean? Lifnei tzimtzum shaychus ha'elemis. It's all relative. And he says, "U'kamoi aliyas harotzen ala elamis," the arising in his desire for the worlds. Erein sof etzem erein sof that he just called. There's no rotzen yet.
People
Now we have
can't go early to the WhatsApp group unless they were there then. They'd have to go to your videos that you post.
No, if somebody wants it, just ask in the WhatsApp and we'll repost it. We'll just forward it.
Anybody can move it forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not anybody. If you signed up afterwards, what Tzvi is saying, if you sign up afterwards, you can't access it, but the rest of us can, so we'll forward it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you know what? If you don't mind, Yecheskel, maybe just forward it anyway, so people will have it if they want.
Okay. Perfect. All 1148 talks.
Look at the titles. It probably will say in the titles, what does it mean levels before the Tzimtzum? Because there's a lot of 1148 is going to have a whole bunch. There's more than one.
It's true. Good. Okay, fine.
If you have a doubt, ask me. I'll try to identify it. It's basically when we start talking these words that there's in Lifnei Tzimtzum levels.
I remember that. Sure.
Okay. So Kamay Alisar Kamaimer Kishaola B'Ritzene HaPoshet Lahaitzel. When it arose in his shapeless desire to emanate. What do you see? That there's a level that something arose. Obviously, it's not physical, it means conceptually, but you see from there's a state before Kishala and after Kishala. That's what Allah means. V'yesham, next page 57, ha'ashara ala ilmus. Not only is there a desire for the worlds, so we have already established there's a level where there's no relationship at all. Then there's a level that's called desire has now emerged. That's like what we said, that he stated us for a rotz. The first level, kloli. Then there's hashara ala ilmus. Now you're ready, hashara means, we said, envisioning, allocating, hashara, I use estimating, not sure. Hashara means you're basically envisioning the world. Ukamayma shir ba'atzme b'keach. This is language from Zohar. But with the Reisha de Harmnusa Malka.
Bereish Harmonisa de Malko.
The Reisha Harmnusa de Malka, Goliv Gelifu B'Tihiri Elah. So it talks about there that was the beginning of the Ola B'Ritzene. Shir Atzme B'Keach means that the one who wants it is envisioning shir. Shir means usually Meshayir. He estimates, he allocates, he envisions, he imagines what the B'Keach Mashi Osid Liyas B'Peil. So it's like you're envisioning your home in detail. Haridigam Mashain B'Chinas Shaychus Kala Ilmus. Dain B'Chinas Apnimi, but B'Chinas Shaychus B'Chinas Makif Ilmus. So what does this mean? That there's a state that it doesn't have any relationship with existence. And then that which doesn't have any relationship. One second, hold on. Let me just see the language in Ayin Beis a minute. Give me a second. Yeah. So that which has no relationship at all with the world. And the worlds means Hainu, B'chinas Pnimi. B'chinas Pnimi is the worlds. So now that which had no relationship at all with Pnimi, B'chinas Shaychus or B'chinas Makif El Elamis, has now moved into a state where it has a relationship, and at least it's a Makif to the world. It's beyond them, but it relates to them. And you can't say this is due to the Pnimi because it doesn't have a relationship with the Pnimi. So you have to say that in the Makif it's already associating from its own level, not due to the Pnimi. This is why I explained earlier that it has to be God envisioning what he wants. The Ratzon is envisioning, but not because of a Pnimi. This we discussed also at length. It was not so clear at the time, if I remember. Yeah. Well, we're going to stop here, and I'm going to explain this obviously more as we go further now. So essentially, just keep this in mind, that it's a very orderly process from states that are completely removed, how they slowly conceptually get closer to being relating to existence. And the reason for this I get back is because this is the only way the interface will work in the best possible way. That there are levels that are removed, they slowly get closer to existence, still remain above until existence actually comes into place. So then when we retrace the steps, we have actual stepping stones and rungs to climb. Because you could ask the question, why don't you just jump from Atzmus to Er Pnimi? So I already explained that at length now as well, because you want to have a logical structure that makes sense and that we can retrace. And if we just jump from all through all these levels, and there'd be no Er Atzmi, and they'd right away jump to a level that relates to existence, you'd never have a relationship with the divine that's beyond existence. And you want both, and you want them to interact and work with each other.
So why do we need to, when we reach, somebody reaches before the Tzimtzum, and we need at that point, we don't need these logical process. If we're in a whole different state of before time and space, and why I still can't put my head on why we need these levels before the Tzimtzum.
I just told you it's the only way that the process can work, where you have both realities interacting, a reality of structure meeting a reality beyond structure. You get rid of these levels, the structure disappears. So even if you go there,
yeah, but I can understand these rungs, but we're going to be in such a to be up to that level. We're going to be in, I don't know, a godly state.
Yeah, but God wants a tachtin, but even godly Atzmus wants a structure. He wants a dira b'tachtenim. So then we'll relate to it from God's eyes. Structure is always necessary, whether you're before the tzimtzum or after. The structure is not a sideshow here. A dira b'tachtenim means the structured existence should experience that which is beyond structure. So you never can eliminate one or the other, no matter where you are. You make it sound, once you hit Eid Ein Sof and Bli Gvul, what do you need Gvul for? But God wants Gvul. He wants the Gvul and Bli Gvul to speak to each other, always, even before the Tzimtzum. That's the Kavanah. The Kavanah is there. If God doesn't have that, then you don't need to do anything. Atzmus was always there and always complete and remains complete. He wants an existence like ours that has all the structure to identify and relate to existence beyond structure. There's only way that can work is having both elements there. It has to make sense to the structure, and the structure has to always remain there all the way in the highest levels to the point that the structure realizes there are levels beyond the structure, and the structure can absorb that as well. You want Gvul and Bli Gvul always.
I just thought he was just doing it so we can chop
it's-
it at our low
No,
level.
but what we chap is the whole essence of the kavana that we chap. And the only way we can absorb it is being a structure. We cannot lose structure. If you lose structure, you lose the whole purpose.
Hope I got you.
The only difference is the structure. We only see structure and we don't see beyond structure. When we get to those levels, you see that the structure and the beyond structure are all coming from the same source. That's correct. In other words, there's always going to be the specifics. Existence is never going to lose its identity. It's only going to recognize that its identity is a part of the artist's infinite possibilities and beyond. But the art will always be there. The spheres are not disappearing.
Yeah, I think I got it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's stop here, top of page 57.